Welcome to the Robert Lewis Sermon Podcast. The following is a session from Men's Fraternity. We hope that you're encouraged in your walk with Christ and enjoy this episode.
Well, good morning. I tell you, I see a lot of bright faces out there this morning, and this morning we are in fact going to go to the end of the diagram that I introduced to you last week. We talked about an adventurer's wiring. We compared him to a person who is at a command and control center in that control tower, that looking at the screen with all the issues of life swirling around him and having to make decisions in the immediate of life. And how you make those decisions are critical to the quality of life that you have and that you enjoy or maybe don't enjoy. So this morning, what we're going to do is we're going to leap forward in that diagram and go exactly what we just said, go all the way to the end of that diagram and enter into a place that I'm going to call this morning sacred ground. Sacred ground. Now, what do I mean by sacred ground? It's kind of a unique place, this sacred ground, where we are forced to reflect and to think deeply about our lives. It's a place where we can sift through all that's going through our life and decide what is worth living for and what is not worth living for. What is worth dying for? What is worth giving our lives to? It's really a place that brings us face to face with what really counts in life and what really doesn't. That's what I mean when I call it sacred ground. Often sacred ground is a physical place. For instance, the smoldering hole that we once knew as the World Trade Towers is now sacred ground. Isn't it amazing how that ground has suddenly transformed and clarified American life for us? Our values, our beliefs, our priorities. Life becomes much, much clearer on sacred ground. You know, from time to time I have the opportunity to go back home to that small town in North Louisiana that I call home, Ruston, Louisiana. And periodically when I go back, for whatever reason, I feel drawn to go out to the graveyard where my family is buried. And it's a small graveyard, and over on the very backside, underneath some tall pine trees, is where my mom and my dad and my brother are buried. Also a number of my uncles, some cousins. And I'll be there by myself with the car parked, maybe towards the end of a summer evening I can kind of hear the crickets chirping in the background, the breeze blowing through. And I'm standing there looking at those headstones. Thomas Charles Lewis, Lillian Ethel Taylor Lewis, uncles like Dan and Libby Gilbert, J.B. Halstead. And I can see all those faces around a room when I was growing up at Christmas time or at family gatherings and those kind of things. And it's amazing to me how in that moment it becomes sacred ground and the graves begin to speak of foolish and worthless things, of foolish behavior, of courage, of honor, of belief and unbelief. As you sit there among the graves of what's important and what really wasn't very important. Sacred ground. It can be a physical place. But sacred ground can also be a place of mind. It can be a spot in your imagination if it's well cultivated and constructed with timeless truths and noble thoughts. It can be a place that you can go in your mind regularly and visit. And it can bring balance to your life and perspective and hope and encouragement. And most important of all, it can give your life a compelling vision. A generation ago, psychologist William Sheldon of Columbia University of the College of Physicians and Surgeons, he made really a profound statement. Listen to what he said. He said, deeper and more fundamental than sexuality, deeper than the cravings for social power, deeper still than even the desire for possessions. There is a more generalized and universal craving in every human makeup. It is the craving for knowledge of right direction, for orientation. You know, every one of us crave that. Every one of us, whether we consciously know it or not, we crave a sense of right direction. We want to be oriented rightly to life. Because to be in that place is to be in a place of meaning and fulfillment and of deep satisfaction. For any man to live his life well in this life, he must be properly oriented to life. Not just to part of it, to all of it. To the past, to the present, and to the future. There is nothing worse than a man who lives his life without aim, whose life rises no higher than the immediate of just what is today, the now, and who then stumbles to an end he has never seriously considered. There's nothing worse than a man like that. A right orientation to life requires a cultivation of sacred ground in the mind. Now, last week we explored what I call the adventurer's wiring, this diagram up here. And we looked at it, and what you see on the screen behind you is what I call the three kind of primary components, starting with our birth. And that's why we celebrate every year our birthday. It was a major event in our life. And we came into this world possessors of a unique design, a unique makeup. We are unique creations with a destiny to make a unique contribution. And then we move to the present where, as we talked last week, life gets real confusing at times. Because even though we're designed to make that unique contribution, there are problems in our life, and there are past wounds in our life, and there may be the lack of convictions in our life, and all those things that are swirling around us, and pressures and those kind of things. But we're having to make these decisions every day, and you'll go out into that madness in just a few minutes, won't you? But hopefully it's moving us, if we make good decisions, towards an end, so that when we come to this last major feature or component, our death and the eternity that follows, that something good will be there for us because of how well we've lived our life based on what we were created to do. And those are the three components. Our design, hopefully we know it, we appreciate it, we're using it. By the way, next January we'll spend a lot of time exploring our design together. It's going to be an exciting time with Bill Wellens. Those pursuits, hopefully, that are in line with our design and moving us to a positive end. And then our end. Our end. That last component that I just put up there, death and eternity. It's a place we often don't go unless we're forced to go there. Some of you in the next month will receive a call from a friend, and you'll be told that a relative of yours has died, or a person that was a work associate has died, and you'll be forced to go consider that sacred ground again. I want you to know, I think going to that place and contemplating that place on a regular basis is one of the most strategic moves a man can make. Not because he's forced to, but because he chooses to go there. Our end is extremely important, and consideration of our end may be the most important thing you can do to have a great adventure in your life right now. Stephen Covey writes in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he says, to begin with the end in mind means to start with a clear understanding of your destination. It means to know where you're going so that you can better understand where you are now. And then to take steps that will move you in the right direction of your life. Now let me ask you to write something down for just a moment, if you got a pen. Because I think this is very important. Here it is. Contemplating our end. Write it down. Contemplating our end. That is our death and eternity. A place where we don't often go, like I said, unless we're forced to. But contemplating our end, our death and eternity, is the sacred ground of the mind. And how well we envision our end has everything to do with how well or not so well we'll live our life today. Let me say it again. Contemplating our end, our death, our eternity, because that's where we're all headed, is the sacred ground of the mind. And how well we envision our end has everything to do with how rightly or wrongly we will be oriented to this life. Now, I know for some of you here today, talking about death and eternity is not what you came in to hear. It kind of seems like a hard right turn in this great adventure that we've started. Most of you probably here would be like me. If I were sitting in your place, you'd be coming in here this morning saying, hey, I just need some relief. Just give me some relief. Give me some help right now. Help me to have more fun in life. And hopefully before this is over, we can do that. Help me to make my marriage better, to have that better family adventure that you talked about. Help me to be a better fit for life, or help me to recapture some of the adventure that I lost out of life. That's why I would probably be out there. And for some of you young guys, it's a real reach to stretch out all the way to death and eternity and say that that's important for you right now. So I might shock you with this statement about what a real man is all about. But let me say it this way. A real man, a guy who's going to count in life, a guy who's going to be successful in his life, a real man will take the time to anticipate his death and the eternity that will follow. And he will linger over this sacred ground often until the present fits the end to which he is headed. The better, truer, and more realistic that fit between the present and the end, the more life and a man's life and this world will make sense to him. The more it'll make sense to him. The more I'm in line with my end, the more life is going to make sense to me, especially as I grow older. And the more I'm in line with the end of life, let me tell you what's going to happen. The more I'll find myself being invigorated as I move through life. The more energy my life will gain as I move towards my appointed end. The greater the satisfaction and the greater the anticipation as I move through life, when I'm moving through life in a way that fits the end to which I'm headed. It's called sacred ground. On the other hand, the poorer the fit for you as a young man right now, and the direction you're headed is way out of line with the destination that you'll ultimately find yourself in, as you move through life, the more you will feel frustrated with life. The more you'll feel like that Coke bottle that I had last week, shaking it up. And people will bump into you, and what will spew out is anger and frustration and a sense of alienation and purposelessness and lostness. The poorer the fit between where I am now and the appointed end, the more I will be diseased about life. So an adventurer's sacred oath ought to be the following, if he in fact wants to be a great adventurer. Here it is. This is the great oath, I think, for all of us. I will fervently live my life according to my design with the end in mind. That takes in all of those three major components of an adventurer's wiring: the beginning, the middle, and the end. I will fervently live my life according to my design, and we'll find that. We'll look at that in the winter, starting in January. But with the end in mind, which we're going to be looking at over the next several weeks. So how do I get a grip on my life? Okay, especially the end. Well, that's where we get introduced to kind of a very impractical subject because it's so abstract in some ways. It's a metaphysical subject. Remember the song, Let's Get Physical? Okay, this morning let's get metaphysical with one another. Metaphysics is to life what peripheral vision is to sight. It's the larger background behind the immediate foreground that we focus on. You guys are focused on me, but just as important to seeing me is this whole arena that we're in. We talk about great athletes, and a great athlete is not one who just has an immediate focus. What do we say a good running back has? He has peripheral vision, right? Psychologists tell us that peripheral vision is as important to sight as ocular vision, the immediate. It paints the whole picture for us. And though today you will be focused on work and projects and goals and those kind of things, the bigger picture behind life, the metaphysical picture behind life, is having an impact on everything you do and will do today. So what is the larger metaphysical backdrop that's kind of behind everything that's going on in our lives? What do the experts say? You know, you'll be surprised to know that there are only two metaphysical views of this world. Did you know that? I mean, we're going to be philosophers for just a moment. But there are only two metaphysical views of this world. Let me put them up on the screen. They're on your outline. There's what we call the traditional religious worldview. It's the bigger backdrop behind things that we do. So we're going to paint the backdrop today. And then there's what I call the secular scientism worldview. Now, I use the word scientism for a reason. I didn't want to use scientific because it pits religion against science, and that's not really what's going on in our world today. Science is kind of the occupation of measuring the material world that we can see. It tells us what is. But when science moves to scientism, it begins to assume that the material world that it can measure and see and taste and touch is all that there is. Do you see the difference between the two? Science just tells us what is. Scientism then moves almost to a religion. It says that the material world is all that there is. And we don't usually talk about that, but the world in which we live today, in which science is so prevalent and influential, it has moved us to think that this world is all that it is. We have such a faith in science that it actually becomes a religion called scientism. And yet there are many scientists that you wouldn't put in this category. In fact, today there's a huge movement among scientists to say, hey, we really see is what we can see tells us that there's even more behind what we see. For instance, Arthur Peacock is a guy who's a very famous molecular biologist in Oxford, England. Here's what he says, and I think he speaks for a lot of scientists. He says this, he says, in my youth I was an agnostic, but as I did research, I was terribly impressed that the universe really was intelligible. So why does nature always turn out to be more intellectually coherent than anything we can conceive before we do the studies? I now believe the universe is rational because there is a supra-rational being behind it. In other words, what he's basically saying is what apologists have said for hundreds and thousands of years, and that is, we see design, therefore there must be a designer. And there's a whole movement among scientists today that's called the intelligent design theory. And that intelligent design theory has come as scientists have explored the universe both in the macro sense as well as the micro sense. The more they do so, the more they see design. In fact, the smaller world has been the one that's the most amazing because it should have been simpler, and yet it's even more complex than we've ever imagined. And in the magnificence of that detailed creation, scientists are saying, they're backing up and finally saying, this couldn't be by accident. This must be by design. And if by design, there must be a designer. So we have two views today. The religious kind of traditional view, in which there are scientists and all that believe that. Then there's this secular view, worldview, in which some have said, well, we can measure the world and that's really all that it is. And I just want to explore those two views. Now what I want you guys to know, because I know it's just pulling you forward into a philosophical discussion, that's the only two worldviews there are. This is it. The end to which we're headed. And one of these days you'll either end up on the left or the right. That's it. So I think it'd be good we know a little bit about it, right? Okay, let's just give some differences between the two. Here are some of the differences between the two. For instance, in the traditional religious worldview, it says that humans are the less who are derived from the more. We are the offspring of divine glory. We are, as our Constitution said, created equal. That was a big assumption. On the other hand, the secular worldview says that humans are the more who have been derived from the less. Nothing in this worldview, this scientism worldview, nothing in the universe is more intelligent than us. That's the viewpoint. We are a magnificent accident of random chance. That's who you are. Secondly, the traditional worldview assumes that we can see, and what we can see and measure is secondary to what we cannot see. Science, when it moves to scientism, says that what we see that's all that there is. On the other hand, this particular worldview, the religious worldview, says no, what you can see is really only a small part of what is. And that was what the Apostle Paul said. He made a statement in 2 Corinthians 4. He said this, while we look not at the things which are seen, but the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. It gives us a chance to kind of view, for just a moment, the larger backdrop of life. On the other hand, the secular worldview assumes that what we can see and measure is primary, if not exclusive, to any other reality. Matter in this particular viewpoint is all that there is. Thirdly, the traditional worldview allows for the fulfillment of one of the strongest desires and anticipations of the human heart. And what is that? Well, here's what Solomon said in Ecclesiastes 3. He said, God has set eternity in our heart. And what he means by that is that God has put a desire as He created man for eternity, for something bigger. And all through our lives, though we live bound by gravity and space and a body and all that, there's something in us that wants to go beyond that and actually feels a need to go beyond that. Is that just the product of chance? Where is that? Why is that in every culture, in every age? Here's what C.S. Lewis said from Mere Christianity. He said, creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exist. A baby feels hunger. Well, there is such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. Well, there is such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire. Well, there is such a thing as sex. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. If none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, that does not prove that the universe is a fraud. Probably earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it, but only to arouse it, to suggest the real thing. That's what the traditional world says. That we have this desire for eternity because eternity is there. On the other hand, the secular worldview denies the fulfillment of our heart's eternal longing. Death is the grim reaper. Earth one day will either freeze or it will fry. Scientist Steven Weinberg put it this way. He said, "The more the universe seems comprehensible, the more it seems pointless." Life has no happy ending. Life just has an ending and a big period in this worldview. Fourthly, the traditional worldview points to a meaningful continuance of our lives after death. And to those who, quote, believe in many religions, what many religions would offer, a happy continuance. Somewhere at the end, there's going to be truth and justice and reward and punishment. You know, you go through this life and you go, you know, who's going to finally get even for all the horror that was just recently done? We may or we may not. But there's something in our heart that longs for a place where all of this is going to be wrapped up and finalized. Traditional worldview says there will be such a place. It will be a meaningful place after death. On the other hand, the secular worldview points to a meaningless ending to our lives at death. As one philosopher said, life is a tale told by an idiot, signifying nothing. Now, with both these worldviews, they have a common embrace. They're both embraced by faith. To believe this is embraced by faith, the traditional view. To believe scientism and the secular worldview is a huge leap of faith as well. Both are by faith. Now, I tell you that because, again, we get a chance to kind of together explore the end. We're saying, where are we headed? We're headed to one of these worldviews. They're mutually exclusive. They don't mix. Because if all we are is a tale told by an idiot signifying nothing, Paul, the Apostle Paul, was the one who was right. He said, let us eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Period. And so here you are as a man, and you're out there looking towards the end. And how you decide on that end will be the backdrop, the peripheral vision of why you make the decisions you make today. Let me just give some illustrations. If you feel like that the end is the end and nothing further, then what prevents you today from having that affair? What prevents you from spending money you don't have? Some sense of rightness in the world? From where? Who? You see, that peripheral vision is impacting the way I feel. On the other hand, if I believe I'm headed to an end where there is meaning and reckoning and reconciliation, the idea of having an affair, that peripheral vision affects that decision right now. It tells me that there's something more to life than just the immediate. And that the faithfulness, as hard as it may be for the moment, is important to the end. That's the peripheral vision of life. That's the backdrop that affects the foreground, the focus that I have today. And I know it's not an easy thing to go to this sacred ground. That's what it is. And to stand there for a moment and think, yeah, where am I going? What will it look like? What is there? Now, I present those two views because I think each of us as individuals have to look at that and go, which of those views best align themselves with what I know about life? And I want you to know, I think everything in our experience pulls us towards the former, the first, the religious worldview, rather than the latter. There is something in us that cannot conclude that the end is the end. There is something in us that cannot say, when it's over, it's over. There is something in us that dreams about something further. And I think all those things, like C.S. Lewis has said, are desires that are there because they will one day be fulfilled. Well, these two metaphysical worldviews of life give us, they're only two, but they do give us four choices of how we're going to finish. And I want to look just briefly at the four choices. Here's the first. It's kind of what I remember. Some of you remember the cartoon where at the end of a cartoon, Porky Pig would come up and he'd go, da-da, 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 da-da. That's all, folks. That's the first choice we have. That when we're finished, we're finished. It's a dead end. It's called the dead end option. We can consider these two worldviews. We can say, when I'm finished, I'm finished. And so I think that will lead back, as you move back through the years, from the end to where you are right now, as you move back, that viewpoint cultivates greater and greater selfishness. Because there's nothing to live for bigger than you. The second view is where we come to a conclusion, it's not the end. Okay? It's not the end. So I'm going to opt for the first one. It's not the end, but everything's going to be okay. Now, I can't tell you why it's going to be okay. I'm just going to be the blind optimist. You hear that kind of blind optimism when some drug and sex-craved rock and roll star dies of a drug overdose and they're walking out after the funeral and somebody from Entertainment Tonight sticks a microphone in one of his friends' face and he says, yeah, old such and such, he's up there right now in the big rock and roll band in the sky. And when I hear that, I want to jump through the television set and go, how do you know he's in the rock and roll band in the sky? And that everything's okay. But that's the blind optimist approach. It doesn't matter how you live, doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter who you are. At the end, when you die, everything's going to be okay. That's your second option. Here's your third option. It's not going to be the end, you believe that, but I'll be okay. That's what I call I'm the good enough option. That's the person who's looking at his life, comparing to other people, and he feels pretty good about himself. They ask a lot of people in America, in Time magazine, do you believe in a literal hell? I was shocked that how many people in America say they believe in a literal hell. It was like 80%. And then they asked the American public, are you going to go there? And 95% said no. Okay? So everybody kind of feels pretty good about themselves. I'm going to be okay. Now, I don't know about you, because I've watched you. I'd be worried if I were you. But I'm going to be okay. See? Remember the old line, all the world is strange, save me and thee, and even thou art a little strange. So I can worry about you, but I'm going to be okay. Now, here's what I want you to know. If I don't feel okay, all the major religions of the world except one will help me be okay. They'll give me some formulas for doing certain things, and if I do all those things, then I'll be okay. All the major religions teach doing better, and after doing better, if you do enough better, you'll be okay. Except one. One religion will say no matter what you do, you're not going to be good enough. Which brings us to the last option. It's not the end, but I'm uncertain and uneasy. It's the I need help option. Okay? And that's the one where, as we look at life and as we look at ourselves and we look at the end, no matter how good we think we are, we're still uneasy about our future, especially when we think of the person of God and eternity and judgment and whatever else goes on there. It makes us uncertain and uneasy. And if we could have some help, we'd certainly take it, because we don't think we're going to be good enough. Now, that's where Christianity fits in, and that's what separates Christianity from all the other major religions of the world. Well, I tell you that because in the next few weeks, what I want to do is I want to take some time, and I wish I could tell you that I know everything about all the other options, major religions of the world. I don't, but what I do want to do as men is I want to take some time to explore the last option, the Christian option, and I want to say, what does Christianity say about the end? Specifically. Now, unfortunately, you know what most men think Christianity says about the end? That when you die, you're going to put on a white robe, you're going to have wings, and you're going to sit on a cloud and play a harp and sit around listening to a choir all day. And that's the vision of the end. There could not be a more boring vision for a man. So why would you want to go there? Send me to hell where there's some good football games. Right? What I want you to know, interestingly enough, is that in the Scripture, there is some pretty specific paintings of eternity. Real specific. Pretty graphic. And that's what we want to look at next week. Okay? But I say that only because I think we ought to know where we're headed. At least hear what some are saying about where we're headed. Because that's sacred ground. And eventually, guys, and especially you younger guys, and because I was young once, you're moving to this conclusion. You're moving there. And as a pastor, oftentimes I get pulled into men's lives who haven't seriously considered that. And then suddenly, with one diagnosis, is there. They're there. They're right on the precipice of this moment. And they've got to decide. But it's the wrong time to decide, because as they begin to contemplate, they realize they never really fit the way they needed to fit for this moment. And that's what I want you to think about, is because the better the fit in your life when you're young and as you move to middle age, and there's never a late time not to get fit, but the more you're fit with the end in mind, the more energy and satisfaction your life will have. I promise you that. So we need to know what's down at the end, because that's sacred ground. That's peripheral vision. And I promise you, it's affecting what you do every day in powerful ways. Well, let me wrap it up with some final thoughts, and here's what they would be. Just some final summary thoughts. First, an adventurer always lives with the end in mind. I want to keep saying that. And the end is where we rarely go, but I want to go there for a while. I don't want my only education of the end, or your only education of the end, to be a funeral. An adventurer always lives with the end in mind, and only with a clear and decisive view of the end can we do these three things. Pursue a life with a balanced and healthy perspective. Leave behind a satisfying legacy. And be ready and confident about eternity. That's what the end will help you with. That's the fit it will give you. Secondly, I want you to know that man has never done well when his belief goes no further than this life. Man has never done well when his belief goes no further than this life. I don't know if you have those huge volumes of Will Durant on human civilization. I purchased them many, many years ago. Right before Will Durant died at 90 years old, he had been writing history for 70 years. He wrote a little tiny book, The 10 Lessons of History. And one of the 10 lessons was this, is that mankind has never risen above his religion. And when he doesn't have religion, he doesn't do well. I remember I mentioned the Beatles. Remember John Lennon wrote the song Imagine? Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. Just ask the people of Eastern Europe to imagine that. They did. They lived it out for 50 years. It's called communism. Peggy Noonan, who was a speechwriter for Ronald Reagan and a correspondent for Dan Rather, was asked by Ford magazine, along with some other philosophers and writers and poets, to respond to Forbes' 75th anniversary edition, which was entitled, this was written, by the way, a few years ago in the midst of the roaring 90s, "Why do we feel so bad when we have it so good?" Here's what she said. "I believe it's because our ancestors believed in two worlds, and they understood this world to be the solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short one. We are the first generation of man that actually expected to find happiness here on earth. And our search for it has caused much unhappiness. The reason, if you do not believe in another higher world, if you believe only in the flat material world around you, and if you believe that this is your only chance for happiness, if that is what you believe, then you are not disappointed when the world does not give you a good measure of its riches. You are in despair." Man never does well when his belief goes no further than this life. Thirdly, avoiding a conclusion about the end is essentially a vote for the now-only lifestyle. You say, "Hey, I don't want to think about this." And believe me, guys, I've talked to a lot of guys, and there are a lot of bottom-line guys in this room. And talking about some abstract, futuristic, metaphysical thought is painful. But here's what I want you to know. If you avoid conclusions about the end, then that's a vote. That's your vote for a now-only lifestyle. I'm just going to live in the immediate. I'm just going to focus on what's in front of me. And I counsel you all the time. Because it's going to end with frustration. It's going to end with failure. And in the end, it will end in fear. And then lastly, if there is more to this life than death, okay, then we should do all we can to understand what's next. And that's what we're going to do in the next couple of weeks that follow.
Thank you for listening to this week's message. It really helps us when you rate and review this podcast. If you found today's teaching helpful, take time to do that today. This podcast was produced by the team at Sound of a Rose. Visit soundofarose.com for any of your podcasting needs.